This episode of Investors and Operators, I am chatting with Denise Logan, who has a unique background and intersection of being a trained lawyer, a mental health professional, a business owner, and some might say a whisperer to sellers and owners. Denise has written a book called The Seller's Journey, which is a best-selling book with USA Today and the Wall Street Journal. We're going to be talking about the following. First, why successful owners find it hard to let go of their businesses. Number two, what can buyers, private equity firms, do to ease that transition process for owners? Next, what does a regret-free closing look like for both the seller and the buyer? We're going to start there. We could probably do multiple episodes. Denise, let me start with this question of, why is it so hard for owners to let go of their business?
We'll often hear kind of joking in the industry that owners treat it like it's their baby. And that's not a joke. They have birthed it. They have raised it through the terrible twos. They were up all night with it. They lived through the teenage stage. And now they're getting to the place where it's time for them to let go. And it makes sense. Just like we go through the same kind of transitions in our real lives, business owners are going through the exact same kind of transition. The difference is when we go through transition in our normal life, we're going through it with other people. So we'll hear sometimes private equity buyers or investment bankers say, oh, they treat it like it's their baby. Yeah. And sometimes it's their favorite child that they're having to let go of.
I mean, why? So how do you start to make that process as painless as possible? Is it to sell them like, hey, you have not thought about what your identity looks like post close? What are you going to do? Like, I mean, what is the checklist of things that we can do to let go easily?
It's such a big list, and I don't use a checklist. Here's what I will tell you. Often I hear investment banker, private equity advisor who will ask the owner, so what are you going to do when you sell your business? They don't know the answer to that. And so what we will often hear is, I'm going to travel and play golf and hang out with my grandkids. And yes, you will for 12 weeks. And then life is going to come back. I think a more useful question to ask, this is the one I ask. What does work provide for you other than money and financial security? Because we're not selling the business unless you're getting money and financial security. Often I will hear from an owner when I ask that question, well, like what else is there? But let's dive in a little into what owners actually are getting from their business. So it's things like structure. There is structure to our day, our week, our year when we own a business. There are other things like a place to go, right? During COVID, weren't we all desperate to get out of our houses? And P.S., our spouses were desperate for us to get out of their houses too. And so for our owner, that is a place to go. Often I will work through with an owner. I want to know the 15 things that they get from work other than money and financial security. And when I start with that, let's find 15 things. Often there's a blank stare. Like, how could there possibly be 15 things? But Jordan, let's just play this out a little bit. You were nodding along when I said structure. For sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know that when I left investment banking after 6 years and I had to start my new company, is like, from where? What do I do during the day? When do I start work? When do I stop doing work? What does my day even look? What should I even prioritize during the day to start this business? So it's probably a very similar thing. If I've been grinding it out for 10 to 15 years on one business, and then it's like all of a sudden, you're not.
Why should I get up in the morning? Right? Right now, you know what time you have to be up. And you have to be up at a particular time so that you can get your run or your cycle time in if you're a morning cyclist. And you know what time you have to be at the office. And you know what comes next. And you have all of that. And that's just in the course of one day. You know what your week looks like. You know what your month and your whole year. You know which conferences you normally attend. And guess what? Owners will miss those things. They miss that structure. That's just the baby piece. So we would want to say to an owner, and that's work that I'm often doing with them, let's talk about what the structure of your life will look like on the other side of the sale. And I'm not going to make them know the answers to all of that, but they're often afraid. You know, retirement, which a lot of them are facing with the sale of their company, they think they are retiring. There's heavy resistance to the use of that word because retiring for us will not look like retiring for our parents and grandparents. We are not going to be happy playing golf and waiting for Wheel of Fortune to come on and feel like we have had a satisfying life. And our clients won't feel like that either. I had an owner say to me recently, well, I don't want to learn how to knit and play mahjong. I was like, oh, honey, is that what you think we're going to do? Because I don't want to learn to knit and play mahjong either. But her perspective on what is available to her after she leaves her business was very small because what they have seen is very small. So let's go back to the question of what else might they be getting? So we just look at structure. It's also a place to go. Where will our owners go during the day when they leave? They're not just going to sit around the house. They're not going to McDonald's to just drink coffee all day. They want to know, where will I go? Another thing that they're getting from work is friendship. Often their customers, employees, vendors, even their
100%.
competitors are their
Friends.
friends.
I thought about that now. My wife and I are in that exact same situation. You know who my closest friends are? Like literally my clients. And the reason is that like our sport is business. Our passion is
Right?
thinking of ideas. How do you create this? Should we have this service? What's it going to look like? Call the customer. And you develop that relationship 5 years, 10 years. We go to their weddings. We go to, their events. Like we're actually integrating each other's lives.
Right. And our owners are aware of that for themselves too. And sometimes they worry, would someone even take my call? So part of what I'm going to work on with them is which of those customers do you want to stay friends with? And how do we begin developing that now? Not just after you're out of the business. How do we make sure that those friendships are secure and not just dependent on your business? Here's another thing that people get from work. It's the intellectual stimulation, right? You are thinking about things. You are problem solving. People are coming to you for your wisdom. I don't know about in your house, but in my house, the people don't necessarily think I am as wise as outsiders.
I think we share that sentiment.
And our owners experience that as well. Other things are, especially for, not always, but especially it shows up more for male owners, the thrill of the chase, the thrill of the kill. I made that sale. I closed that deal. I accomplished something. What I'm getting at is these needs don't go away just because they get a big sack of cash. Let's think about that from Iron Man, because that is a big part of your life and your life with your wife. What are the needs that you are getting met by Iron Man?
Yeah, I thought about that. I think it goes back to 2018 when our first business was falling apart and my relationship with my co-founder of the nonprofit was falling apart. And it feels like I've been doing this since 2016, 2017, 2018, and it's all falling apart. And then even my wife was like, you spend more time with the veterans than you do with the family. So like everything was falling apart. And I just needed something that had a definitive beginning and end and was really, really hard.
Mhm.
So I just made up my own marathon in Central Park and I did it in 8 days. And I'd never done a 5K, never done a 10K, never done a half marathon. I was like, next weekend, I'm going to do a marathon in Central Park and I'm going to get friends. So 11 friends came out and they rode their bikes and some ran with me the loops. But what that satisfied for me was like, I just needed to win some theme that didn't say that I was losing day after day, week after week. And
Mhm.
so I think that, fast forward to today, you've done 17 marathons, 7 Ironmans, and I don't know, 4 or 5 halves, Ironmans, bunch of half marathons. And I think what it means to me now and what I get out of it, it's like I just did a marathon last weekend here in Atlanta. And like, I love going on that mental and physical journey during that race and going in through the depths of pain and then having to see how it's almost like a way to ask yourself, like, do you still have what it takes?
For sure.
And
You also get to talk about it, right? You get to say, I now hit my 17th, my 18th, right? So there's a sense of personal pride around that. When you're training, that's something you get to do just for you,
mm,
right? That's like a little private
and actually
time,
now, like our family, like our 8-year-old's done like 35Ks. Like it's a part of our family identity now.
right? So we start to look at, and there are a lot more than what we've just touched on that you're getting from it. If I said to you, okay, Jordan, here's a big sack of cash, but you can't run any more marathons. That was it. Nice job.
Yeah, it would be hard because if it, and maybe to extend that, if I couldn't do anything physically challenging like marathons or Ironmans or like we do jujitsu 3 days a week, like if I couldn't do those things in exchange for cash, like no.
Would there be enough money? It's what we see sometimes with owners that they think X will be enough, but then they're like, wait, but I don't get to do the things anymore. I don't get that sense of accomplishment. I don't get whatever the things are that they're getting. Now, if we take it in a different direction, that, and I'm going to like knock on wood so we don't jinx you, you have a physical injury and you can't do it anymore. Where do you, those needs did not go away.
Yeah, I mean, what would
How are we
happen
going to
is,
met them? How are we going to get
yeah,
those met?
I would do what the Kyle Peace Foundation does. So we're involved with this nonprofit that helps disabled athletes go off. So like last weekend doing the marathon, there's probably, I don't know, 25 plus disabled athletes in the chairs and they're being pushed. So like, the reason why I got in even more to doing Ironmans and marathons is because I saw Brent Peace pushing his brother Kyle Peace, who has cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
And like, if it came into that situation where I was in a wheelchair, like I'd still want somebody to push me. I'd want somebody to pull me 2.4 miles in the ocean. And I want someone to bike me 112 miles and then to run me 26 miles. And then I could be there to support them because I know when I'm on that course, how motivating it is to see others have no excuses. I was in Chattanooga at last September at doing an Ironman there, and I was just mentally spent at maybe mile 18, and I was coming up on a runner who was blind, and I'm like, you know what? Suck it up. Like this is okay. This person is getting after it, and they're probably struggling. So, it was just a good way to reframe that. No matter what our struggles are, like people find a way to be a better version of themselves and do things that are challenging.
Yeah.
So if I couldn't
And
walk and I'd get in a chair and I'd ask people to do that.
mhm. And we might look at, if that were to happen, we would also look at how do you get those other needs there, right? Your sense of accomplishment.
Mm.
How else could you get accomplishment without it needing to be physically related? That would be a piece of work that I would do with you. I would say, where else can accomplishment happen?
Yeah,
Where
like
else can personal pride? Where else can a sense of completion? Because completion is what you were looking for when you first started it. You were
mm,
like, yes, there is no, like for many of us in our work, there is no beginning or end. It's just an endless array of the same work, right? How do you get completion on something? Maybe you take up, I'm just making this up, you take woodworking so that you have something that you can complete and you have a product at the end. We would look for all of those pieces, and that's what's happening for our owners. But it's easy for them to default to the, all right, I'll just do another business. Just in some ways, like your default was, well, I'll still do the same thing. I'll just have someone push me or pull me. Instead, we would go deeper. You and I will have a separate fun conversation about, and what if that thing wasn't available? How else would
if
you
I
get
couldn't do
it?
it, I would I think a mental challenge is more not a non-physical challenge is probably more difficult for me right now.
Yeah.
And like there's this guy Jesse Itzler who I follow a lot of his content. His wife Sarah Blakely was the founder of Spanx.
Oh, yeah.
And
Sure.
and I think he spent like a week or something like that with living with monks, and he wrote a book about it. Like that would drive me nuts. And he was kind of telling about how, you know, he was stuck in this room with no clock or anything, and it felt like it was an eternity. He was like, no, it's been 1 hour. And I think that type of challenge, like I would go absolutely nuts.
Right. We look at where are the growth pieces. So right now, probably a lot of your friends come from your athletic world for sure. Right. And what would it be like if that wasn't part of your future? Where would your friends come from? For our business owners, it's often that, right? I'm not going to go to the HVAC manufacturers conference anymore because I'm not in that industry. And yet all of my buds are in Vegas this week doing the HVAC conference. How do we develop friends? Not that. That would be a piece that early on, all of the things, it's because it's easy to default to, well, I'll just keep doing the same thing. That's why owners don't sell, because they don't know how to meet these needs in other ways, or they think the only way to do it is to compete with their prior company, which is, of course, a big no-no. So they'll sit out. They'll be like, all right, I have to sit out my 2 years, but then I'm starting the same thing back up again. It's never going to be the same because it's not meeting the same needs at that point. So thanks for playing along on that conversation of, right, you get a lot more things from your Ironman and marathoning stuff than just the physical part. It truly is the friendship.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably even go more into uh, the volunteer work. So with our nonprofit that I started, 51 Vets, helping transitioning veterans to get jobs. Like I've been doing that since 2017. Probably did, I don't know, 3,000 hours literally of it.
Yeah.
I get so much fulfillment out of it. And then I don't know, I'd probably do something, go equally as intense into that. Um, I don't know. I don't know.
And especially because you and Jing are together in this, right? When we're looking at co-founders both leaving, I have a client that I'm working with now. They have two men who have been co-founders of this company. Almost 40 years they've worked together across the desk from each other. One of the things that they are really worried about is, will their friendship survive? If they sell the business, or has their friendship only been this? And what if they don't get to see each other as often? And so we're dealing with that. First we articulate it, and then we make a plan around it. So yeah, that was a little sidetrack that I thought might be fun. And so when we ask an owner, what are you going to do when you sell your business? They don't know, because they don't even know what they're getting now, other than money and financial security. So some of the things that we would also dive into, I will tell you the first 4 or 5 on the list of things are easy, right? We've hit on them. They're things like structure and place to go and intellectual stimulation. Friendship is a little hard for people to admit. I don't have any friends. But then we start getting down to the ones that are difficult for us to even admit to ourselves, like power. At work, I say I want something done, and it pretty much happens. I don't know about in your house, but in my house, that is not what happens just because I say I want something done. There is power. There are all kinds of deeper needs, and those are kind of some common ones, but each owner has unique things that they are getting met from their work. It's our job to figure out what are all of those needs and how will we continue to help that person get them met, because they are not likely to find one other thing after they sell their business that meets all of these needs. And that's why we watch owners who sell their business and 6 months later take a big chunk of their cash and go buy another business. They're solving for something, but they don't actually know what they're solving. They feel adrift. And this applies whether we're talking about young owners or older owners. Can I tell you a story about a client?
Yeah.
This owner was 36 years old. He was selling his software company. He was going to net $17 million on the other side of the sale, which is a pretty good chunk of change for that time in his life. And one day he said, who am I going to hang out with? All my buddies have jobs. We had a less EQ skilled investment banker on the transaction who said, dude, you can buy friends. I was like, oh no, that was in your outside voice where we could hear it. What happens in a situation like that, and he was just being funny, but what happened for our owner is that issue now went underground. And it was going to show up like little mushrooms popping up in the transaction that don't look like what they're saying. I think one of the challenges with the way we do deals now is it is a transaction, and everyone in the process is talking about the transaction and the economics of it. But for our owner, this is also a transition. And it is the largest transition that they will go through in their adult professional life. And unlike in other transitions that we go through in our life, where we go through with other people, right? Think about when the last child leaves home. What do we call it?
Empty nest.
Empty nest, right? We know what it is. We know what someone is going through. We have language for it, and they're going through it with other parents of children. So when it happens, no one is shaming you because you came to the table with one more plate after you dropped your child off at college. But it happens for all of us. All of a sudden, you've dropped the child at college and you're glad, right? That was your job. Your job was to grow them up and get them ready to launch. And we miss them. So we are glad and we are sad. For our business, it's exactly the same. Our job is to grow it up and prepare to put that hand in the hand of the next caretaker. Think about, I was at a conference in Dallas, and there was a banker and a lawyer, and they were talking about why owners, how can I use the language? Why owners are so dumb and why they hold on and why they don't let go. So it was a wine tasting. And I said to the one guy, I said, do you have any children? He said, yeah, I have a daughter and a son. I was like, how old is your daughter? He said, 8. I go, put your wine glass down. So he puts his wine glass down on the table, and I tucked my arm inside his, and I said, now, I want you to imagine that I am your daughter, and you are walking me down the aisle to that guy over there. And when we get there, you're going to put my hand in his and let go. And right away, the tears started pooling in his eyes. And he said to his buddy, oh no, why didn't she choose you to do this with? But as we took our little walk across this wine tasting room, the closer we got, the more he was able to actually feel that sense of, oh no, when I let go of my daughter, my relationship with her will be forever changed. What I was doing in that experience with him was helping him to find the empathy and the emotional connection to his seller. That the seller is experiencing that very same thing. Of course, I want to make this business successful and to hand it off to someone else and harvest my wealth. And I'm sad. I'm glad, I'm sad. And if we allow the place for them to have those emotions and for them to filter up, and that's often the role I'm serving on a deal team, that the emotion comes here to me. So there is a place for them to vent it off. Then they can be present with the transactional aspects. Otherwise, every emotional issue that comes up, they will frame like an economic or a transactional term, even when it's not that.
Yeah, and also, like, how many times have we heard someone or private equity firms say, like, we weren't necessarily the highest bidder, but we had the relationship, et cetera, et cetera. Like, if everything that is non-economic, like, has a tremendous impact on driving the decision to go with one, buyer versus another.
And it's what's coming up under the surface. Maybe I'll give you another example. And I will tell you, I think the emotional arc that an owner is going through is exactly the same, whether we're talking about a $50,000 hair salon or a $500 million manufacturing company. Obviously, I live in the middle market. I'm not generally doing those, but it is the same arc. So in this particular transaction, $85 million manufacturing company, 8 weeks before closing, the seller suddenly announced he would not take a penny less than 9 times EBITDA, which is great, except his deal was at 6.2. So that's a pretty big delta that suddenly happened. And all of the advisors are telling him why it's a good deal and why he's going to get sued. And then he stopped talking to everyone. So the investment banker called me and said, I think my seller went crazy. I'm like, yeah, sounds like it. Let's see if we can figure out what scared him, what hidey hole he went into, and how to coax him out. So his original plan was to sell the business, buy a sailboat, and sail around the globe. You can get a pretty good boat for 85 million bucks. So this is probably not about the money, right? What I learned is that 2 weeks before he asked for this unicorn of more money, his wife said, I'm not doing that. I do not want to be stuck in a boat with you far away from my grandkids. Hell no, we ain't doing this. Can we agree, Jordan, that he is not coming back to the deal team to tell them the deal is off because his wife won't let him do what he wants to do? There's no chance he's going to do that. Instead, he asked for something that he knew he couldn't get so that the deal would fall apart and he could save face. So once I sorted out what was happening, I did individual work with he and his wife separately. Then I brought them together with a solution where he would buy the sailboat and sail, and every 6 weeks she would take one grandchild and fly to where he was. They would do 2 weeks on land, building memories with the grandchild. Then she would fly home and he would sail on. Boom. Our deal was back on track, closed on time at its original asking price, because it was not about the money.
How many of the sellers that you've worked with do you think go into some type of depression after the close? And how
Almost
long is
all
it?
of them.
How do sellers get out of post-transaction depression?
So some of it is knowing what they're missing, right? So we've talked about some of the things that they might be missing. I might even just use my own example. So in my early life, I was a therapist, and then I was a lawyer. And I built a law firm in Washington, D.C. When we reached 50 lawyers and 300 support staff, I exited my practice, merged with a Baltimore firm, and I was happy as a clam. And I'll just give you the day. This was back in the late 90s. And so we still had file cabinets then. So the other law firms sent their trucks to pick up all the file cabinets and the desks and all the hoopla. And as the last truck was turning out of the parking lot, I just wanted to see it. So I leaned in toward the window and I smacked my head right on the glass. And there were tears pouring down my face. And I thought, I don't think I hit my head that hard. And that's when I realized, oh, wait, I'm not crying about hitting my head. I am seeing years and years of my life turning the corner. And then when I went into the front office and I took the name off the wall, I got what I wanted, but boy, that felt differently. And in the weeks following, I would be in my patio, reading a magazine, drinking tea, having a great old life. And then suddenly I would think, oh, I should tell so and so. Oh, wait, that's not mine to tell anymore. Or I would miss my clients who I was sick of, honestly, or I would miss my employees. The people around me did not actually understand what I was going through. They would say things like, but I thought you wanted to sell it. I did. And now I don't know who I am and what's happening. And so I often say to owners that what I went through was what I call, I got what I wanted. Oh no, I got what I wanted. Wait, was that what I wanted? Did I get what I wanted? And that is a natural emotional roller coaster anytime we have transition. So if we take that even into, let's say, normal life, a lot of times I'm trying to normalize what an owner's experiencing. Have you moved from one house to another, Jordan?
Oh yeah, and country from San Diego to North Carolina to Shanghai to New York, New Jersey, down here to Atlanta. Done a few.
Right? And you're excited to move, and you have this new place you're moving to that is lovely. But as you are leaving the place where you have been, there is a letting go that's happening. And sometimes you start questioning yourself, are we making the right decision? Or even after you're in the new house, all of a sudden you don't know, where does the silverware go? And wait, my favorite Thai restaurant is just a little too far away for me to go to. There is a natural, I'll call it a rhythm of disappointment, depression, excitement, enthusiasm, confusion that is going on even in those small transitions of our life. So when we put that in place of this transition, it makes total sense that our owners would be feeling that. So part of our goal to help them land safely on the other side of this transition is to help them to know what it is, prepare for it in advance, and then I often stay on with them and accompany them into this new part of their life so that they have someone they can talk to about this. And it makes sense. Not all the transaction team is going to do what I just described. Some people are listening to this right now saying, it's a bunch of bull. I don't have time to do all of that. I got to get a deal done. Yes, you do. And when these emotions are coming up, if we give a little space for an owner to acknowledge what's happening, they move past it. Just like the owner who said, who am I going to hang out with? If we didn't solve that issue, number one, he needs to be able to articulate it to someone who can help problem solve, which is my role. But if we don't solve that, it's going to be stewing at 3:00 in the morning for him, and he might kill his deal accidentally because he doesn't know what else he's struggling with and how to address it.
I wonder to what extent the MDs at the investment banking firms have this awareness and, authentically go through this process with their client. They fly across the country to go sit down with him. And they say, Denise, hey, yes, we can talk about the deal, but before we kick this off, you and I need to have some really a heart to heart about a long list of questions. And this deal might take 6 to 9 months. Here's what's going to happen. Here's the emotional roller coaster. But you got some homework to do emotionally over the next 6 months, aside from the deal. I wonder how many MDs are doing that level of advisory, which is not financial advisory, but is probably more important to the owners.
For sure. Very few, I think. Mostly what they will do is they'll have the checklist. They'll ask the question. So have you thought about what you're going to do afterwards? Yeah? Good. Check. as if that's done, and it's not done. This is a level of diligence that it's not just knowing in advance, but also giving them the tools along the way. So
Mm.
I was at
Because
a,
they try to get enough of the story to be able to repeat a sanitized version to the buyers of what the situation is.
and remember that the investment banker is in they are in a sales cycle. They want the owner to say yes. So are they going to dive in more deeply? They should. I was in a room recently and some folks were talking about a busted deal, which happens a lot. Usually I meet someone, they hear what I do, and they'll say, "Oh, I wish I knew you 3 months ago." And then they tell me about their busted deal. And I always say, there's good news and bad news. The good news is you know me now. The bad news is you're probably going to want to know me again. That was probably not your only
Yep.
messy one. So the deal that he was telling me that fell apart is that the company was owned by father and son. They met with the son, they met briefly with the father, they're running the process, and then at the tail end, the father put the kibosh on the deal and it fell apart. And they're like, "Oh, that was such trash." And I said, "How did you not know this? Like, how did you not know that that's where we were headed?" And they said, "Well, they said the son was good to run the process." I was like, if the son told you, "Yeah, our books are clean," would you accept that? No, you would not. You would dig in and you would look at the financials. And what it tells me is that this emotional process we're talking about makes most of the transactional professionals uncomfortable. And so they pretend it's not there. They pretend it's not going to be a problem. And then when it arises, they're uniformly shocked. Yet this is part of preparing an owner well and making sure that they land safely on the other side. Because for every owner who lands safely on this is the biggest chasm in their business is the exit. When they land safely, they become your absolute best referral partner ever. If all we're thinking about is I just got to get this deal done and dump them on the other side, those people are harmed. They are harmed. And I think we have a responsibility to do better. It's why when we think of ourselves as trusted advisors, you don't become the trusted advisor by putting that word in front of advisor. You become that by being willing to slow down and have serious conversations and provide the resources for your owner to land well.
So it might be that the advisors just don't know how to provide the resources. They might know some of the questions, but might not have the resources.
Someone in every deal is doing what I do and hates doing it and is usually doing it inartfully. The owner is emotionally leaking on someone. Often I will hear someone in a transaction say, "Oh, I'm part-time psychologist in all my deals." And I always say, do you realize what an honor that is? And what a responsibility you have to do that well. And if you can't do it well, let's make sure you have someone who can do it.
What does a regret-free closing look like for the seller? What does a regret-free closing look like for the buyer? And how do you make this as smooth as possible?
I'm going to toss one more party in that we haven't talked about, which is a regret-free closing for the owner's family. Because often they are as impacted by this, right? Even though your wife is going to deliver twins, you are going to be impacted by all of what comes next. And so are our owners. So are their families. So is their community. So a regret-free closing, I think, number one, I think it starts way earlier than most owners begin, right? We could go back to Stephen Covey's rule, begin with the end in mind. Most owners are only thinking about their exit way too late, maybe a year before. Honestly, I think the time to begin thinking about the exit of your company is when you begin. How will I leave this? Or if you are buying a company, how will I leave this company? What is my next plan? Because then you are planning toward it. You and I were talking about that earlier, right? How do you begin so that you are not the stumbling block in your company? How do you prepare so that the company is ready so that the owner is not the blockade in the process. So I think we begin much earlier, but most people don't. I have a new client that I've begun working with, and he's ready to sell now. He is, or he thinks he is. The business is not ready to sell yet. And he hasn't actually done the processing of what it will be like to not be in that business. So he is someone who waited until I don't want to run this anymore. That's not a setup for a successful transition, partly
Yeah,
because,
it's a fire sale. It's
right?
was it what are the three Ds, like death, divorce, and I don't know what the third one is.
Disability, right? Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
it's it's some version of that, of where you're emotionally like, whatever, just get done with it. I'm
Right.
done.
Can't do it anymore. Just sell it. And we know that in the process of a sale, there's going to be ups and downs, right? I think about the children's game, Chutes and Ladders. And I will tell you, I grew up in Canada where it's called Snakes and Ladders. And I don't know who thought making a game, children's game with snakes was a good idea. But if you think about that game, you you spin the dial or you roll the dice and it tells you how many places to move. And you either hit a ladder where you go up and you think, woohoo, I'm winning this game. And then 3 rolls later, you hit a chute. And emotionally, it feels like, oh, this sucks. I don't like it. It's why we have children get frustrated and flip the board game. Owners are exactly the same. And so as we're talking about how to have a smooth transition, we want to prepare them for the ups and the downs. I often hear someone in a transaction say, time kills all deals. And I will tell you, I do not think that's true. I think unprocessed emotion is what kills deals. And usually the person who is saying time kills all deals is the most scared person in the room. They're the one who says, we can't slow down. We must move forward. No, sometimes the slowdown only needs to be a couple of hours, but we need to slow down so someone can emotionally catch up. Otherwise, the up, down is very normal for the transactional professionals. It is a horror for our owner. And unless we allow them to settle and then be able to take the next step, if we are shoving them, they will shut a deal down. They will close it, or they'll take it and be destroyed on the other side. So when I think about what makes a smooth transaction, what allows everyone to feel good on the other side, we have done all of the due diligence at the beginning, including emotional preparation for our owner that begins long before we're up against the wall. I often get introduced because there's a chaos in the transaction. We don't have to wait until there's chaos. When I come in early at the beginning of a transaction, I'm just part of the process. And I am moving seamlessly throughout to keep the emotions in check for everyone. Let's think about this. When the owner starts to get a little scared and starts backing up, the investment banker is terrified because there goes their commission and they will start shoving. So my view is shove me. Don't shove the owner. Shove me a little bit until you get that out of your system, and then let's move smoothly with the owner. Same thing. The lawyers are often arguing about things that are not what we're actually arguing about. There's ego, there's other things. I will seamlessly move into that process and help calm what that really is so we keep moving forward. That allows for a seamless transition. And often, one of the buzzwords we hear in the industry now is that, an owner can sell and get a second bite at the apple. I don't know about you, Jordan, but I don't like to drive the car when my spouse is telling me where to turn. And we have to be able to assess, are the owners that we're offering that kind of thing to, does that make sense for them as people and as emotional beings? Because having them stay on in a company where they do not have any more control is not right for everyone. And that is
It's
part of
hard
the,
for them to take that, to swallow that pill of like, hey, you're actually not a good CEO for this stage of the business. You really should just be maybe head of sales or maybe product or something, but you're not right for the next stage and for our tenure of ownership.
And you think about even some of the language that we use in the deal process can be very shaming for owners.
Mm.
So we'll talk about low hanging fruit. Well, if I'm an owner and I hear that language, what I'm likely to think to myself is, oh, how dumb am I? How come I didn't get that? How come I didn't harvest that? And they might have resistance that shows up because of some of the language we're using. We also, I will tell you, as an industry, we use ridiculous language. The thing we give when the deal closes is called a tombstone. What on earth are we doing? This is their baby. And we're like, yay, thanks. Here's a tombstone we're going to market with. There's a lot of languaging, even just when we start doing due diligence with an owner, understanding emotionally where they are and why it's normal. How we ask for documents, how we ask follow-up questions. Like often we will ask, why did you do this? The owner is going to feel affronted by that. They are used to being the person who knows every single thing about their business. And now they're going to have questions asked of them.
And not having, I mean, we don't have a board, right? We don't have outside
right.
investors. We don't have a board. We don't have an advisory board.
Right. And will I look dumb? Will I have made mistakes? Will you disrespect me? So the way we even conduct early due diligence sets the conditions for how that relationship goes. So often that's something that I'm educating a team about. How do we ask these questions? Or here's a curious thing from a psychology perspective. We each have a certain number of questions that we can answer willingly before we blockade up. And everyone is different. Mine, 7. I can take 7 consecutive questions before I'm like, shut off, no more. But every one of our owners is going to have their own formula for that. Now, if we factor in a spouse, just because I'm going to tell you another really fun story. We were very close to the closing on this, and all of a sudden some chaos started surfacing up. And I said to the deal team, I don't think this is coming from the owner. I actually think this is coming from home. And it's not uncommon for me to do work with the spouses as well. So I had a session with the owner's wife. And at work, the owner is a bully. He had been involved in tons of litigation with former employees, and he was just that kind of guy. And unconsciously, she had begun to realize, oh, when he leaves the company, I'm going to be the target for all of that bullying. So she was unconsciously creating turmoil in the background. I got him involved in a boxing program. He thought it was for his physical fitness and his friendship needs, and it definitely was. But once he locked on to that boxing program, all of that chaos settled down, and we were able to close smoothly. So the things that are going on behind the scenes are often very unexpected when we're just looking at the transaction.
For the sellers who have successfully transitioned and mitigated the downside emotional journey, what are the things that they have done? You know, for example, do they get deep into a charity, or do they just get in the car and drive to their kids' college and they don't leave the campus for 6 months?
There are so many different tracks for that. What I will tell you is the charity is usually the least effective one. And it's often what people are saying, you know what, you should get involved in a nonprofit. And if we know what need they're trying to meet with that nonprofit, it can be successful. But let's say you're trying to get your power need met. You may not get that met by being on the board of a nonprofit, especially if you are not the chair of the board. And so we want to look at what are we trying to solve for. I'll give you an example. I concluded a process with a client recently, slightly outside of my regular bailiwick. She was an attorney, and her firm had a mandatory retirement age at age 70. And so she and I worked together for a year to help her prepare to let go, because otherwise she would just retire, take all her clients, go to another firm, and do it all over again, which was not in her interest or the firm's interest. And so we looked at one of the things that was really important to her is who's going to ask me questions? Because right now she led a great big team. People came to her with everything. So we needed to identify what were going to be good solutions for her in her post law firm life where she would feel her wisdom was valued. And those were things we were really heavily focused on. It was also friendship for her because, what was she going to do? She was not going to learn to play mahjong. And so we had to look for where were places that as a 70-year-old woman, she would make new friends. And as adults, our meeting of friends is very different. And so we didn't wait until after she was out to begin doing this work. We started at the beginning of the year. So she had an entire year to go through that process of transition and to begin building those. And we looked at travel. Travel's a good example because everyone wants to travel when they're no longer working heavily. We looked at what were all of the trips for the entire year. Where would she go? How would she get there? How long would she stay? What would she do? How long would she be home between trips? And we mapped out we did 18 months for her where she knew I'm going here and I'll be here this long for this time. And then I have this gap at home. And what will I fill that with before my next trip? So that as she stepped into her post business life, it actually was something that was calling her to it instead of her feeling like she was being shoved out of something. That's why I often work with clients for longer. Like I'm not just coming in, oh, now you're in trouble. Let's fix this lickety split. We're probably going to have a 6 or 12-month engagement where we're going to really look at all of those pieces. And then I'm going to come alongside so that I'll often say to the professionals in the deal, all the crazy comes here and I get to handle the crazy and you are handling an emotionally resolved person. So that, yes, they do get kicked up. Let's say there's going to be a retrade on a deal. Happens a ton. I would ask for the professionals to involve me in that in advance so I know what it is. I'm going to help them frame it. And then I'm going to be there to catch the owner when they hear it so they don't crash. And we process that and I bring them right back into the conversation. That's what allows someone to land safely. And everyone in the transaction has their own role. I'm not expecting that the investment banker or the lawyer or the private equity buyer is going to be able to do the things that I do.
So, maybe to kind of think about what we can do, like, so Jing and I are co-CEOs of the business, 8-year-old, 5-year-old, twins on the way, early 40s. We haven't even thought about selling the business. It's not even at the stage that we're at. But what are the kind of questions that we could be asking right now to start thinking with the end in mind?
Yeah. If we just said, when do you want to be out? We'll just choose that. How will you know it's time to be out? Is it money? Is it age? Is it a certain number of clients? And you can just make it up right now. You don't have to have a firm answer.
Here's the draft version. When would we want to be out? Well, I guess that presupposes that we would want to be out.
Oh, I love it. You just set up my favorite little line. It is not if, it is when. Every one of us will leave our businesses voluntarily or involuntarily. And I believe it is better to prepare for when, because if can happen anytime. It will happen.
Yeah. And so okay. So when we are out of the business, um, whether it's a financial number that is so interesting after, 5 or 10 years, then like, hey, I just want to do something else. So I'm trying to think through like, what are the reasons why we would want to be out of the business? Like one, I think right now it would be if we were intellectually bored
Mhm.
and we weren't enjoying the process of building the vision that we are.
Well, for
And
sure, we don't want to wait until you're bored to try to extricate you,
well, I think if it got into
right?
like 15 or 20 years, like, okay, we're just doing the same thing over and over, as opposed to like, one, with our current service lines, I love the intellectual challenge of, hey, we need to do a rebrand for our portfolio company. Well, if you're going to change colors on all of these assets in the business, how much is that going to cost? How long is that going to take? Who's going to do it? Like, should we make this marketing decision? I love launching a business with the spin out private equity firm. Like that's fun. I also love thinking about the different business lines that we should start. Like, we just placed 5 people and got paid 30K each for placing 5 people. I guess we have a recruiting business now. So like, I love creating businesses. That gives me a lot of energy. It's less about the money because my co-CEO wife and I are more motivated by, being able to have the lifestyle that we do, being able to spend tons of time with the kids, do all the races we do, being able to travel and do it integrated with the business. Like
Hmm.
if we're driving across country, like we're taking a whole bunch of calls and we are doing the business. Um, so when would be ready to sell? Yeah, I'm trying to think about what are these different levers.
Right?
Um,
Let's just choose one. Let's say you're 41. Is that
yeah,
right? Let's say that you in your mind say I want to be out when I'm 55. Okay? It's 14 years from now. I can't read what your face is thinking
yeah,
about
yeah.
55. I'm like,
No, I'm
"Oh,
just
there's some expression happening there. Tell me, what are you thinking?" When I say 55, what comes up?
yeah. So 55. Well, actually, so I'm 40 right now, 41 in August. So let's say 15 years from now, my twins will be 15, so they'll still be in high school.
Right?
My 8 and 5 year old will be in college and beyond. But um, yeah, I think that um, I don't know where I'm going to be. Like,
Right. And the reason I chose that because I knew your children would still be young, your youngest would still be young at that point, is oftentimes with CEOs they will say to me, what do I want my kids to think about if I'm not working? Like what is the messaging that I'm sending? That's a separate conversation for us to talk about. How do you message about responsibility and money and meaning to your children if you are not working? Or we'll say not working in quotes, right?
yeah,
What does that mean? And would you only stay in your business for the purpose of messaging to your children? Yes or no? There's no judgment about that, but these are the things that we start to dig into. And let's say that instead, let's age you out to when both of your twins are out of college. Where is that? We're talking 22 years from now?
22 years,
Uh,
so 62.
right? And there's nothing wrong if that's the number that you put. We're playing with an exercise
Yeah,
here, right? If you say, I'm going to work, and whether it's this business or another business, I'm going to do this until I'm 62 and the kids are off the dole at that point, right? Then the way you begin thinking, how much money do you need at that point when the kids are off the dole? And how do we keep you actively engaged? And do you need to be the CEO of the company when you're 62? Or do you have replacement CEOs at 45? And
yeah,
you become the idea generators. There are a lot of things that, I mean, we're just playing with this right now. But if instead we wait until an offer comes in out of the blue, someone is like, wow, that's some great business. I totally want 51 labs. And an offer comes, how will you evaluate it? How do you
Yeah,
know if that's a good offer?
we had one not too long ago, and it just made us start to think like, wait, what? And we're like, number one, not even close to this, but it started making us think, what business are we actually building? What does it mean
Right?
for the family? But also, what does it mean for our team? Because, we take our roles seriously of being stewards of their early careers or whatever
Mm-hmm.
their stage at in their careers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, this is awesome. This might be a part one.
But this is what we're talking about. Often owners are up at the moment where they're like, I guess I have to sell, or an inbound offer comes. If you don't know what life will be like on the other side, what are we framing for? Instead, it just becomes about the money. And by the way, money matters, but it's not
Mhm.
the only thing that matters. And it's what we see. I'll give you just another slight example. There was a private equity firm that wanted this family run business, husband and wife. And they had made several offers and it wasn't happening. They invited me in to have a conversation with the husband and wife. The husband was ready to sell right now. He was like, yeah, let's go. And the wife said, well, wait, we've been building this for our son to take over. And so I said, oh, well, where is your son on this process? He's a sophomore in college. Well, like that's a way different period. If he's a sophomore in college, he's not even integrated into the business. And so I said, have you had that conversation with your son? And no, I mean, they thought they had, right? So I had a conversation with the son and he said to me, if I have to stay in college and get 5 PhDs until they sell this business, that's what I'm going to do. I was like, well, that's a plan. Or why don't I facilitate a family conversation where you express that to your parents? And then after he did, the mom was in profound grief because from her perspective, they had been building this for a child that didn't want it and the sacrifices that they had made. And so we did some grief work and eventually they sold to that private equity firm. But it's about, what are you building? Why are you building it? What do you think? Are you building it for your children? Nothing wrong with that, but do the children want it? Are they capable of it? Those are the kinds of things that when I think about owners preparing early, that's early preparation. And we keep testing it along the way. Does that still test true? Does that test true? Instead, what often happens is an owner meets with their financial advisor who tells them you need X amount of money to be able to retire well. And then they tell their investment banker or business broker, I need X. My business is worth X because that's how much they need, not what the business is worth. And then chaos ensues. So I always think we prepare early. How will you leave your business? And what will be the markers along the way? And then how are you moving toward that? Because offers can come in early, but how will you evaluate them when they come? Or heaven forbid, something happens to either your interest, motivation, or physicality where you are unable to continue doing that.
I love it. Well, we've gone a lot of directions, but all of them's been productive, and I've been taking a lot of notes. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I mean, if we think about a takeaway for advisors and buyers, the earlier we help an owner to address these issues and give them the resources where they can be processing this, the more likely they are to make it smoothly across the finish line.
There we go. I think my co-CEO, co-founder, and wife, and mother of soon-to-be 4, she and I have a lot of thinking to do.
And I suggest you not raise that until well after the babies are born.
That's probably a good idea.
The receptivity might not be quite as high in the next couple
Probably
of
not going to
weeks.
get the best thinking.
Well, you're getting there. Oh, I wish you well.
Thanks so much. It's great to see you.
You too.